explain where this comes from. Daniel was taken away in exile from Jerusalem, about 586. He was with one of the groups. There were a couple of groups who went away in exile to Babylon around the 6th century. And he rose to prominence in the courts of various kings in Assyria, in Babylon, and Media, and then Persia. So he lived about 500 years before Jesus was born, also. We're not sure exactly when his book was written, but he lived in 500 years before Jesus. And what you're going to hear today is something that was written half a century before Jesus was born. Okay? That's what it is.
Daniel's dream of 14. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. Four great seas, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. And there before me was a second sea, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' After that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard, and on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. After that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, purifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all former beasts, and it had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire, and his wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Then I continued to watch until the boastful words of horns were spoken speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, and his body was destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man, coming with a cloud of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worship him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. The interpretation of the dream. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise on the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever.
Ever feel completely overwhelmed? Like you're drowning and you just can't breathe? Like it's just too much for you? Like you just can't find your air? That you're at the mercy of great forces that are at work around you. You have no control over them. Ever felt like that? Let me tell you about Chippy the parakeet. He felt like that one day. Chippy was just chilling in his cage when Chippy's parent, mother, decided she wanted to clean his cage. Decided to clean his cage with the vacuum cleaner. So she took the end of the vacuum cleaner, sucking out the cage, and the phone rang. She lost her train of thought for a minute, and there was Chippy, sucked up into the vacuum cleaner. Well, she gasped. She opened the bag. There was Chippy, still alive, but stunned, covered in dust and soot. So she grabbed him and rushed into the kitchen and put him under the tap, washed all the stuff off him. But then realized that Chippy was soaked and shivering, and she did what any compassionate bird owner would do. She reached for the hairdryer and blasted Chippy with hot air. Poor Chippy. He didn't know what he did. A few days later, the trauma was over. The reporter came to ask her how Chippy was doing, how he was recovering. Well, she replied, Chippy doesn't sing much anymore. He just sits and stares. You ever felt that way? You just kind of drag on with your life. You just kind of living your life, doing the thing, not hurting anybody, helping anybody, just chilling, and you're sucked in, washed up, and blown out. Well, we've all felt like that. Maybe it's a family disaster, maybe it's death or disease or divorce, maybe it's a financial storm, maybe you've lost your job and you're heavily in debt. But the tempest has come maybe in the form of depression, gale force winds that can rip the sails and leave us dead in the water, feeling overwhelmed and underpowered. Maybe it was COVID, some aspect of COVID. Maybe you or somebody close to you got very ill. Or maybe you lost employment, or lost your job, or lost income. We can feel in these moments that we just are out, carried by the waves of great storm. Some of the things aren't always as we anticipate. The only survivor of a shipwreck was on an island somewhere, small uninhabited island, and every day he scanned the horizon for help, but nothing came. He eventually managed to build a little hut out of just driftwood to protect him from the elements, and this was his home. And he managed to claim a few possessions, and he was kind of starting to get organized. But one day when he was out scavenging for food, he came back to find that his hut was in flames, the smoke ascending up into the sky. It was just more than he could take. He was stunned with grief and anger. God, he said, how could you do this to me? The next day he woke to find a ship approaching the island to rescue him. How did you know it was here? He said, well, we saw your smoke signal. We can't always understand the things that happen to us, but we can always trust that God is bigger. Bigger than the boogeyman, bigger than the terrorists, bigger than all the evil that has walked and drove us, bigger than COVID or any other pandemic. And this is essentially what happens to Daniel. So the scripture tells us, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. I think Daniel may have felt slightly overwhelmed at times. He was living in Jerusalem, carried away as an exile from Jerusalem by the Babylonians. He became sucked into the changing political fortunes of the day. He became fairly well known as somebody who could interpret dreams and say he became valuable to various kings in authority in that place. But now he has a dream or a vision that really disturbs him. He says, in my vision I looked, and there before me were the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. Now, for the ancients, the sea represented two things. The sea represented the mass of the peoples of the earth, but it also represented the forces of chaos. Because you can't control the sea. It just has a kind of mind of its own. 1 minute it's fine, and the next minute is huge waves. So the sea represents the peoples of the earth and the great verse 2, I saw the four winds of heaven churning up the great sea. He's saying, I saw the perfect storm arising from the peoples of the earth. In other words, Daniel sees great geopolitical and military movements taking place. There are about to be great shifts happening in world history, well, of where they live, of course. Spurred on by the forces of chaos, war and destruction and oppression and violence unleashed on the peoples of the earth by various political and military leaders. And he sees four beasts, four kingdoms. He says the first is like a lion in verse 4. The first was like a lion, it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings had fallen off and it was lifted from the ground so it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. The first beast was powerful and terrifying. It was as powerful as a lion, swift as an eagle, has the ability to adapt. Even when it looks like it's been defeated, it can rise up and become even more powerful. This represents the Assyrian and Babylonian empires. Nebuchadnezzar, who was king of Babylon, was often called the lion. And the Assyrian empire, there's a picture, I think, that's the symbol of the Assyrian empire. The Assyrian empire is represented by an animal with the body of an animal, the head of a human being, and the wings of an eagle. And so they only see the Assyrian and the Babylonian kingdom represented by the first beast. These are the ones who were responsible for taking the people away into exile. The northern kingdom was conquered by the Assyrians in about the 8th century, and the southern kingdom was by the Babylonians in around the 6th century before Christ. So you see these two kingdoms represented by the first beast. In verse 5, then before there was a second beast, it looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. So get up and eat your fill of flesh. The second beast was just as terrifying as the first, as powerful as a ravenous bear. The kingdom that came after the Assyrians and the Babylonians called the Medes. The Medes were a relatively short-lived kingdom, but important to the Jews because they succeeded the Babylonians, and the Jews were kept in exile by the Medes. And the Medes just kept plundering. They picked it as a bear. They just kept plundering. The peoples that had been conquered before them, they just kept going back to those territories and taking out more and more, like a ravenous bear, continuing to eat. Then he says in verse 6, after that I looked, and there before me was another beast that looked like a leopard, and its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, was given authority to rule. Third beast is just as frightful, merciless as a leopard, quicker and more deadly. It has 4 heads. The Persian kingdom, which came under Cyrus the Persian, they defeated the Medes. They took the territory, took all their territory, and Cyrus, when he became king, he divided his territory into 4 parts, and he put a ruler over each part. That's why the beast has 4 heads. After that, in verse 7, after that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth to crush and devour its victims, trample underfoot whatever was left. It was different from the former beast that had 10 horns. The 4th beast is the most terrifying and terrible of all, powerful teeth that crush and devour its victims. And this beast represents the Greek Empire and Alexander the Great. Alexander defeated the Persians and took over their empire, and in fact Alexander was so skilled and so powerful, took almost the entire known world at the time. Alexander's empire was so vast, and he took it so quickly, and he was so merciless, that it was said at the end of his life, Alexander died at the age of 32. At the end of when he was dying, he said he was sad because there were no more lands left to conquer. Everything had been taken. These powerful visions that Daniel has emerged out of a feeling of being overwhelmed by the powerful empires that surround him, and they are pictured as monstrous beasts. Fierce animals that are likened to a lion and a bear and a leopard. Or they talk about these empires, these military empires, and the havoc that they can create, and how they can destroy people's lives. Then it was 8. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them. 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a human being, and a mouth and he gave 10 of his generals control over his kingdom. One of them was a man named Antiochus. Antiochus IV, actually. And Antiochus was sort of fourth in line. He killed 3 of the other generals and took power. And specifically, he took power over Judea. The Jewish people had been returned from exile now. They were living back in the promised land. But Antiochus became the ruler of Judea, where the Jews lived. Antiochus was a very cruel, he was a terrible guy, actually. He called himself Antiochus Epiphanes, and Epiphany means the revelation of God. And he saw his plan was to get rid of the Jewish faith. So he outlawed people who kept the Sabbath, he destroyed copies of the law, he punished people for keeping the Jewish law, and he desecrated the temple by ordering a pig to be sacrificed on the great altar in the temple of Jerusalem. And Antiochus is really kind of the worst that you can get as far as the Jewish people were concerned. He is this little horn that comes up that speaks blasphemy. Now you've got hundreds in church without pizza people. Then Daniel says, verse 9, as I looked, the thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow. The hair on his head was white like wool. His throne was flaming with fire. His wheels were all ablaze. A river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were opened. Daniel talks about the Ancient of Days. This is God. He sees a vision of God, and God is on his throne, and he is in the heavenly court. Thousands upon thousands are attending God. The point is, no matter how powerful these beasts are, they have not managed to get God off his throne. God is still on his throne. No matter how much has gone on in the world, God continues to rule, and now he comes to sit in judgment on these kingdoms. He's going to judge them. Because it says the court was seated and the books were opened. God sits in judgment on the empires of the world, calling them to account for their brutality and all their atrocities. Then I continue to look, it says in verse 11, with the boastful words, the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain, its body destroyed and thrown into the fire. The vision of God on the throne offered hope to the Jews who had been subject to foreign rule. They had been exiled from their promised land. They have managed to go back to their land, only to find themselves at the mercy of these powerful kingdoms around them. Even as they saw their houses burned down, their loved ones tortured and slaughtered, the temple profaned by the abomination that desolates by Antiochus Epiphanes. Daniel's vision allows us to see that even though all this was taking place, God was still on the throne. The end of empire, the sovereign power of God, the future kingdom. The king who persecuted them would soon pass away. He would be judged, thrown into the fire. His kingdom, portrayed as a monstrous beast, would perish, just as the kingdom before it did. But how is God going to do this? How is God going to destroy these kingdoms? How is God going to uproot these powerful forces in the world? What is God's plan? It must be a plan of great power. It must be something that is so dramatic that it just takes your breath away. Well, it is. Daniel says, verse 13 and 14, in my vision in the night, I looked, and there before me was one like the Son of Man. Now, this word, the Son of Man, simply means a human being. So Daniel is saying, in the vision I looked, and there before me was a human being coming on the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days, came to God, and was led into God's presence. What is God going to do to destroy these great empires, to bring down these great priests? What great act of power will destroy the cruelty and oppression of a worldly system? Well, Daniel says, the human being is going to do it. A person. God would establish a new and everlasting kingdom that would not pass away. It would be given to this one, and as we read later, also to the people of the Holy Ones of the Most High, the followers of this one. And folks, in the New Testament, whenever Jesus refers to himself, or almost every time Jesus refers to himself, what does he call himself? The Son of Man. Why did he use that title for himself? Why that title? Well, because of this prophecy in Daniel. He's saying to the Jews, I am the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy. I'm the one who's going to bring the kingdom. I'm the one who's going to fulfill the prophecy. I am that Son of Man that Daniel saw in Daniel chapter 7. And I guess there's part of us that say, well, really? A human being? A person? Is that really going to work? What is your plan B, God? In fact, God has no plan B. Jesus is the plan. He's the one. Verse 13 and 14 tells us, he was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worship him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. The other kingdoms are characterized by violence and destruction and exploitation and oppression. But the kingdom that Jesus brings is about justice and righteousness. It has its origin at the very throne of God. In fact, sometimes when we get the news, or wherever you get your news, and however you get your news, sometimes we feel a bit overwhelmed. We read about things that are happening around us, and it seems like the world is out of control. It seems that there are great forces at work that we have no control over. We're kind of caught in the current. As we've come out of this COVID pandemic and kind of coping with all of that, our lives have been shaped in ways we could never have imagined. However, the belief and hope in a Savior that enters exactly where the forces of chaos seem to be most rampant is what allows us to get up and to face the day. That God hasn't left us alone. God is still on the throne. Especially as we come into the season of Advent, we take heart in the image of Christ as our King, the one who was born in the shadow of an empire that came after the Greeks, of course, the Roman Empire, who was threatened and eventually persecuted and killed by the people operating in that empire. But he rose from the dead and reigns on high. And actually, it was the followers of Jesus who brought down that empire. This is our Advent hope. The already but not yet. That Jesus has already brought the kingdom, but we're still waiting for it to come fully. And it's this that gives us the strength to endure. And I'm not sure what you're going through. I have no idea what you're going through. But whatever you're going through, I want to say to you today, God is still on the throne. And God has a plan. We may not always understand it. We might not always see that plan in the moment. But like Daniel, and like so many after him, we can know that God will bring us through this. God is working all things out in history and in our lives for his glory and for our ultimate good. Let's pray. Lord, it's difficult for us to see sometimes that you are doing this, that you are working out history in accordance with your own plan, that you're working out our lives in the same way. It doesn't feel like that sometimes, Lord. Sometimes it feels like the forces of evil, great powerful forces, are more powerful than even you. Certainly more powerful than us. But today we say thank you that Jesus triumphed over all the forces of sin and death, that he is already seated at your right hand, seated at the place of authority, already ruling and reigning. And that one day all the things that distress us, all these forces of evil will be judged and cast into their lake of fire. And Lord Jesus, your kingdom will be everywhere. We look forward to that day. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Friends, I want to invite you to bow your heads and close your eyes and just be in God's presence for a minute. As I said before, I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what you're struggling with. But you might feel a bit like Daniel. You might feel like many of us feel at this point in our lives that it's just too much. You just feel overwhelmed. And if you do, I want to say that this Sunday on Trust the King is not just some doctrine, some dusty doctrine that we kind of knock off the shelf once a year, but it actually is a tremendous encouragement to us when we're feeling overwhelmed. That God is still on the throne. That the forces of chaos and evil and destruction have not and will not ever have the last word. God is in control of your life. God is in control of the world. It might not always seem that way. It might not always feel that way. But this is the statement that we make as people of faith. And we make it emphatically on this Sunday. Jesus Christ is King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And that's true of the world, it's true of South Africa, but it's true of your life. So if you're going through a tough time at the moment, I just want to pray for you right from here. So you're going to ask you to come forward or identify yourself in any way. But just if you're facing a tough time and you're feeling a little overwhelmed or very overwhelmed, then I want to pray for you. If that's you, then just receive this. Father, I pray for those who this morning are struggling with feeling overwhelmed. Whether it's a financial issue or a health issue or a work issue, or whatever it is, Lord, I pray in Jesus' name that you would allow us to leave here with a fresh vision, a fresh picture of you on the throne of the world, but also of our lives, and that nothing can displace you from that place. We thank you. We acknowledge you. It's not only King of Kings and Lord of Lords, but King of our lives and Lord of our lives. And we pledge ourselves to surrender to you, Lord, trusting you, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it seems bizarre, even when it just seems that everything's running out of control. We make a decision